Hi, this is Amelie,
And this is Helen.
presenting you
Hello Audio,
where every 2 weeks,
we are showing you the best entrepreneurs for music, audio, and tech.
and a huge thanks to Leo, who's producing this podcast for us.
Hello Audio by The Venue Berlin.
Welcome to another episode of Hello Audio. This is Amelie, and today in the studio, I am with our very own Jill Beytin. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
Lovely.
So Jill is a co-founder of Bear Radio. Why don't you explain what Bear Radio is?
Yeah, so Bear Radio is Berlin's first and currently only English language podcasting network. We produce in-house programs, we help companies produce their own audio branded content, and we also teach workshops. And we're working to grow the podcasting ecosystem in Berlin by teaching, having these meetups and things like this.
How's that going so far? How long has it been going also?
So I started Bear Radio in the fall of last year, and then very quickly Giacomo, the co-founder, came on, and we officially launched on January 1st of this year with a website that was just, at the time, an aggregator for all of the English language podcasts that were currently existing in Berlin. We hadn't produced anything ourselves yet, but we just wanted to show, hey, there's stuff out there for you to listen to. If you go to this website, you can find other cool things that are produced in the city.
And there's a huge demand for it. I've gone to one of your meetups.
Yeah, there's a lot. And so what we're trying to figure out now, as the company is 10 months old, is how to best manage everyone. Because there's a lot of interest, but we're still quite a small team, and we're always looking for funding. But at the moment, it's just a very small team of people trying to organize all of this interest, essentially.
Why only Berlin?
It's not only Berlin, actually. So we started small because we're a small team. And coming from the States, you always have these smaller community radio stations that have a really big role, and the same in Canada as well. You have these smaller radio stations that have a big role in the events, the goings-on, and things like this of the city. Those stations also license out their shows to national or even sometimes international audiences, and that's how they make money. The way that we wanted to do it with Berlin is we thought that there's a lot of content to produce in the city that could be marketed out towards Americans, to Australians, to anywhere with an English-speaking base and clientele. And ultimately, in 5 years, we see not necessarily Bear Radio, but having in other partnerships a kind of global network, or at least EU-wide network of content that's produced here in English.
Cool. So your target audience isn't just Berlin?
No, but our target audience in terms of our meetups and workshops, yes, is Berlin. But I think that just having it be like any other hub, like having the BBC in London and things like this, it's just a starting city. And we do focus now on stories about Berlin just because that's what's accessible to us to cover on audio.
Podcasting just literally boomed in the last few years. Something that people heard of coming via iPods, whatever, and then something happened, and then it exploded. What exactly happened?
Yeah, so I think originally podcasts came from the States, and they were radio programs that were played live and then rebroadcast. They just saved the audio and saved it on a website.
But did they come from Apple, or did they market?
No, so podcasts existed before Apple Podcasts. Apple Podcasts is just an app aggregator, or an aggregator app. So they are a platform for people to host their content. And it's just that they have a huge monopoly in the market.
But it's a terrible app, isn't it?
It's horrendous.
Yeah.
So I don't use the Apple Podcast app. I use Stitcher, or they just actually released a huge Google Play podcasting app, which is really interesting for Europe because only 20% of Americans really have iPhones, and most of them have Android. It's a thing.
But wait, didn't you say the American market was only 20% iPhone, or the
European market?
European, okay.
Yeah. American market's like 99.9%
right.
iPhones.
Right, that's what I thought. I'm assuming it's more or less the same in Canada.
Yeah, I see so many more Androids here than I ever do in the States. And Yeah, especially if you get to Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. It's mostly, maybe Germany is a bit different. Like there's more people with iPhones here. But for the most part, yeah, it's a lot of Android. So essentially I started listening to podcasts when I was like in early high school, more than like 10 years ago. But it was just essentially a rebroadcasted radio program. And then what changed was that people who weren't associated with radio stations started making them themselves. And so if you were able to use a recorder, you could use it as like an audio blog and put your name out there and get listeners. And it got, I think, like Ricky Gervais was one of the big people in the beginning, like in 2007 or something, with a podcast that had over 250,000 downloads. So it was kind of slow to start. And then I think, honestly, the thing that really made it go global was Serial, which happened I think 4 or 5 years ago, and that was the huge boom for podcasting, and it finally had millions of downloads and was really an international conversation. It had a role in court proceedings and things like that. And the thing is, a lot of this growth has happened in the United States, and it's been happening in the English-speaking world. And the fact that they have those little radio stations that I mentioned is really important because it allows people to have access to a studio. It allows them to have access to a community of people who are interested in audio. And in Europe, especially in Germany, you don't have the same structure. You have like state-funded media, essentially, and it's much more insular and it's much more public media. So you don't really have this kind of scrappy attitude about audio production that you do in the States. And that's why kind of it's taken a long time for it to come here.
Yeah, that was my next question. How the podcast scene in Europe compares to the one in North America is lagging behind a bit.
Well, so for example, in the United States last year, I think, or this year, podcasting advertising revenue is projected to hit $402 million. And I think in Germany, it was 600,000 euros.
Oh, wow.
So it's just that you also don't have the same legacy of talk radio here as you do in the States. Like we had Howard Stern, we had NPR people that you grew up listening to, and here they don't have that same talk radio personality. And that was originally the people who you would want to listen to. There are German podcasting networks, but I think that they really... There are a few, and there are a few, like, for example, audible.de has behind their paywall a bunch of German language podcasts about books and literature and interviews and writing. But I think in terms of finding their own voice, I still think it's a lot of them copying the American banter and rhetoric that you hear, and I think it's a different game. I think a lot of people in Europe need to find their voice for podcasting instead of copying America.
Mm-hmm. So let's say I wanted to start my own podcast. Mm-hmm. How do I reach audience? How do you get your podcast listened to?
So it's kind of like with a blog. Like you have a blog, it's the same thing where you work with people and you use their networks. You work with companies and you use their networks. If you have a limited budget, you do organic social media marketing.
You work with Bear Radio.
You work with us because we have all of our social media channels, and we essentially can offer all of the support. We can help you produce everything. We can offer you free podcast or editing software and things like this. We can offer you workshops on how to teach. We can also help you to work out the concept for an idea, even if it's as simple as creating a Google Doc that we work together on and creating a report or a reporting plan for the next 2 months to produce, say, a 5 or 6 part series. Because it's much more manageable to do things in seasons so that you can actually have a project from start to finish that is done. And I think the reason so many podcasts start and then kind of just trail off is because it's a lot of work to produce audio every week. And I think that a lot of these people who are doing this as seasons now, it's a good idea because it gives you time to produce stuff that's of quality, and it gives you the time to learn the ropes without being like, oh God, I have something due Thursday, I have to do this now. So I think all around having a little finite amount of episodes helps the quality and also helps your enjoyment because you're like, oh no, this isn't just a job I have to get done.
Oh, cool. That's a good idea. I never thought of that. Just going back to how do I get my podcast listened to? with regards to having a blog and having new content spread across channel syndication with writing is not such a good thing. But with podcasting, it's an okay thing to do, to have your podcast hosted on various platforms. It's not an issue with regards to
No.
SEO or...
Actually, so personally, I don't know as much about SEO stuff. That's what my co-founder knows about. But we host our shows on Spreaker, which you pay the money and they make an RSS feed for you, which is what all of these things run on. So if you see a podcast in Spotify and in iTunes and in Stitcher, it's because it has an RSS feed, which you usually have to pay for. And that's also how you manage your downloads and stuff like this. And in terms of like measuring all of these things, you would have to do it through a host, and like Spreaker or Blueberry or some of these other ones.
That aggregates the analytics from the various platforms where it's hosted.
Yeah, the big problem is that iTunes doesn't like giving out analytics, and they're the ones who most people download from. It's a
I
whole
don't think
thing.
Spotify does either. You can't really see view counts on Spotify or anything like this.
And another tactic that podcasts use is that they have shout outs. And this is also what's good with a network is, say there's one show that got really, really popular on the network, then you can have that show shout out other shows and drive listeners and traffic to their websites, whether it be talking about other shows on the network, other shows that they like. All of these comedians on comedy podcasts always go on each other's podcasts and hang out. True crime podcasts also do this. They'll say, like, it's a very big community-based thing, but I mean, I have friends who are like professional podcasters and work at networks in the States, and it really is all about organically growing this stuff. And it's like you can have famous people, but it's like very rare that you will be going viral. There's 450,000 separate shows on iTunes.
Yeah, I know. I think you've told me a thing or two about podcasting, and I think in order to produce something good, it starts with listening to a lot of podcasts. And I know you're a huge podcast consumer.
Yeah.
Which platform do you use, and what are some of the top podcasts?
Yeah. So I use Stitcher for most of my things.
Oh, you do? Is there an app for this?
Yeah, so it's a platform kind of like the Apple Podcast app.
Yeah, I know Stitcher.
And I pay the $5 a month to have premium, so I get extra shows and things like this that are behind the paywall. Also, it helps support the company, and I like what they're doing. My main podcast that I'm listening to now, it depends what topic, because for the most part, I like listening to news podcasts, I like listening to comedy podcasts, and I like listening to true crime and horror podcasts. And those are predominantly what I listen to each week. So everything from like Pod Save America to, hold on, there's too many. I have like 50 shows on here.
When do you listen to this at all time? From what I've witnessed,
I listen to like 5 hours of podcasts a day. I'm not kidding. Like I fall asleep and I wake up to podcasts. It's weird.
What were you doing before podcast was a thing?
I was listening to the radio. I worked at radio stations and stuff, so I was always listening to the radio all the time. My dad worked for public broadcasting.
But the difference with radio is that to me, it's something that plays in the background that you don't pay attention to. Is that how you consume podcasts as well?
No, in the States, growing up listening to the radio, it wasn't like that.
No?
It's a very different mindset. Like you take part in radio, you call in, you listen to the people. Like I grew up listening to NPR, and we would tune in every day to like the same show, All Things Considered. And like always every afternoon you were listening to that. Or even when I was like 14, I grew up listening to Loveline, which is a show all about like sex, and with Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew. And then that's essentially how I learned about sex. And I was just like, oh, I'm going to die from syphilis, because that's all they talk about. It's like people call in with all of their problems. Anyways, so I like everything. I really like true crime. I really like even shows like Comedy Bang Bang, Spontanea Nation, Ear Hustle. I don't know. There's so many.
So podcast by default is just something that you listen to, but could it be something else than just audio, like storytelling or...
Yeah, so when I was at South by Southwest, I went to a really interesting panel because there's a lot of companies that are doing podcasts, but now are writing books and TV series. Gimlet sold the rights for a movie for their like founding story and their initial podcast. and it's going to have like Julia Roberts and stuff like this. So a lot of people are writing books, doing films. Like it's a content company. So it's not just audio. Usually people will start even podcasts as an extension of their book or something like that.
Huh, cool. I had never thought of this. Going a little bit more into the tech route, do new technologies change the way in which the podcasts are distributed?
Yeah, actually, there's this cool new podcast. I forget what it's called, but it's from Google's AI voice. So she does an entire podcast on her own, and it's all AI. And it's a fake voice. It's like a robot.
Just on her own?
Well, I think she interviews people. I've heard it advertised. So she was on Comedy Bang Bang, and the host was talking with her for like 15 minutes. And she was like, "Oh, that is so funny what you were saying, Scott Aukerman. Wow, ha ha ha." And then when he was like, "Okay, bye, thank you," and she went, "Mwah."
What?
It was so weird. But they're like releasing a podcast about this. All of these things with like Alexa and all of these, what are they called?
Smart speakers,
now,
home automation systems.
Yeah, so you can also do the thing where you say, "Hey, play this podcast." Also, there's podcasts from Apple that just have the morning news that are also like in cooperation with Amazon. So there's a lot of emerging technologies in the world of voice and AI, and there's also a lot of emerging technologies in terms of audio-visual experiences and things like this.
I forgot to mention, you guys are working out of the venue Berlin. You're one of our protege startups. I guess you work also with startups, being a startup yourself. And how can other startups benefit from having a podcast, adding the podcast to their marketing tool set?
Yeah, so, I mean, all of these companies, everyone from Twitter to Microsoft and McAfee, like security, have these podcasts that are really cool.
The Venue Berlin even has a podcast.
The Venue Berlin has a podcast. The FCC, which is like the censoring bureau of the United States, has a podcast.
About what?
I listened to it. It was really interesting, and it was all about how they had to censor various coverage that was essentially rumors from Hurricane Maria, like in Puerto Rico. And it was like a whole censorship thing with social media, yada, yada, yada. That was then being, essentially these rumors were being reported as fact. When there was all of this drama with the hurricane and there wasn't any news people down on the ground. So it was kind of like them playing this larger role in the narrative of all of this stuff. Anyway, so podcasting is super beneficial, and it's more of the only problem is that it's a bit more of a long game. So it really is a cool way to produce, to kind of foster brand loyalty. So for example, the thing with McAfee is friggin' awesome because it's this guy who talks about all these crazy hacking things, and like he talks about his life as a hacker, but it's paid for by an internet security company. So it's kind of ironic, and you kind of show that as a company, you get to kind of control your own narrative and your own voice. And it's a really cheap and easy way to get listeners and integrate it, or listeners, which also translates into purchases, and get it into like your other social media channels and just kind of integrate it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It should be part of every company's social media marketing mix, it seems.
Yeah, it's like having radio ads. And so the other thing is you can also sponsor podcasts. So a lot of these big companies like Casper mattresses, Lisa mattresses, Squarespace have gotten huge because they've been advertising with podcasts.
Yeah, it seems every other podcast that I listen to on Spotify right now is sponsored by Squarespace.
Mm-hmm. And they have podcasts allegedly have the highest cost per meal, like cost per 1,000 impressions of all digital media. Because it's super effective, and they have these really cool things like, as you hear with Casper mattresses, when they say, "Hey, type in this code that's our podcast," and then you can directly like track how many buys came from that ad.
And regarding the business aspect of this, can you actually make money out of podcasting? I'm assuming in America you can.
Yeah, so that's kind of why we've decided not to limit ourselves to Berlin. We want to, our business plan essentially is 3 prongs. We have branded content, We have ads from podcasts eventually, and then we have workshops. So workshops are just how we've been doing this for now. And this is also the fact is that we need to foster talent for tomorrow, and we need to teach people how to produce audio because we don't have enough men on the ground who know how to do this. We want to kind of foster tomorrow's talent. So that's kind of our short game for getting funding, is teaching workshops and also getting people on our network.
Why don't you actually plug your workshop? They're happening soon.
Oh, yeah. Well, our first workshop will be or was on the 8th of September. And then we're going to be offering them at least one or two weekends each month for at least the fall, just to see how they go, fall/early winter. Just because there's been so many people who have been requesting this. And so if you're interested in taking a podcast workshop, just go to our website, bearradio.org, to learn more or reach out to us at info@bearradio.org. And the other things are that we are doing this branded content, which is the next step. Lastly, we want to do these advertisements, but until you get these like 5,000, 15,000 listeners, you're not going to get it, especially in Europe where it's very much driven by direct impressions. Like the business is really different here than it is in the States, as I keep stressing. And doing, sponsored shows for money and things like that. But that's why we're kind of branching out into more European, because that's where all the listeners are European English speakers. And there's another few people we know here that we are going to partner with to kind of make this a bigger EU-wide network, not necessarily Bear Radio, but start producing some European-wide shows that would actually attract listeners from around the continent. Because, Berlin's not going to get you money.
Goddamn burden. I think that's about it. This is a podcast about all things music tech and audio tech. So let's go to music with one last final question. What have you been listening to? What is like your hot track of summer 2018?
Oh my God. I do listen to music, not just podcasts.
Oh yeah, good point.
I promise.
When?
Well,
At the same time.
in development, we have a pop punk podcast, a pop punk nostalgia podcast. So we've already recorded a few episodes. It's my friend Cameron, who's another American, and myself, who are both huge music nerds, huge pop punk nerds. So we recorded two episodes.
Pop punk, like Blink-182?
Yeah. So we recorded an episode on Newfound Glory. We recorded an episode on Dashboard Confessional.
I love Dashboard Confessional.
That was our first episode. So we're doing an episode on Paramore, Braid, Brand New, and My Chemical Romance for the first season. So all of my music I've been listening to has been pop punk.
Just give me one track that you've been listening to.
I'll just say that I've been listening for research purposes / my own enjoyment to the new Paramore album a lot.
No idea.
It's like female-led pop punk.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, you're gonna need to share your playlist with me.
Oh my God, I've got it. Yes.
Hey, Jill, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. This was Jill Beytin from Bear Radio. We're having an after-work session with them tonight. If by any chance you also are a stakeholder of the music or audio tech industry, we'd love to hear from you. You could co-host an after-work session or, just get in touch, say hello. We always like to hear from new people. Find us online at thevenueberlin.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, SoundCloud. Drop us an email, music@thevenueberlin.com. This was Amelie for Hello Audio. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Hello Audio by The Venue Berlin.